So this instalment is about my journey with regards to pelvic floor. So I have explained in one of my other videos about my journey with diastasis recti, and this one is a wee bit more information about my own personal journey when it comes to kind of rehabilitating my pelvic floor. So I have got 4 children who are currently, and this is the year 2022, they are 6, 9, 10 and 11, yes. Sometimes it gets a wee bit. I used to have a good memory before I had kids, but it's not quite so good. But I can't remember what age they are, so that's good. So yes, with my pelvic floor, I didn't have any issues kind of prior to having children. I don't even think really thought about much about in terms of kind of my pelvic floor. Everything functioned fine, and in terms of kind of all the kind of like going to the toilet, in terms of kind of intimacy with my husband, everything was fine. So I had no issues, no concerns. When I was pregnant with my first, I think I did some pelvic floor exercises because I'm a good physio, and I thought, yes, I should do what I have learned about and what I tell other people to do. So I did some exercises during pregnancy, and my first baby was 9 pounds on the dot and was a forceps delivery with an episiotomy. So I was fortunate. I had a fairly straightforward assisted delivery and a straightforward forceps delivery. The baby didn't need turns. She came out with a bit of encouragement with the forceps, and I also had an episiotomy. And if you don't know, an episiotomy is a cut into the fascia, basically to kind of enable a bit more space for the forceps and for baby to come out. So I didn't have any issues with my stitches, and everything healed fine. So that was really good, because some people can have issues with the healing or with an infection, and that can cause problems when it comes to the scar healing or the mobility of the scar, and then that can have knock-on effects as well. But I was really fortunate. I had no issues, did my pelvic floor exercises. If anything, I probably was a wee bit too keen to do them and started them fairly straight away, and maybe did probably too many and too kind of strongly, if that's a thing, too vigorously to start with. So I eased off a wee bit and did little often. And when it comes to pelvic floor exercises as well, it should be related to whatever you're doing. So if you're lifting a heavy weight, you're going to need more of a pelvic floor contraction compared to just doing a simple contraction lying down when you're not having to work against gravity or body weight, for example. So yep, I had no issues. I didn't have any leaking or any other concerns after my first, and pretty much within probably kind of like 6 to 8 weeks, didn't feel there was a major issue. When it came to kind of like resuming intimacy with my other half, like most people who've had a baby, a vaginal delivery, it was a wee bit uncomfortable, but with lots of lube, which is the top tip for everybody after they've had a baby, lots of lube, then it was fine, no problems at all. So I went into my second pregnancy, my second was born 18 months after my first, and again had no major issues with my pelvic floor. I had a home birth with my second, who's a boy, and it was pretty straightforward. I didn't have any tears, I didn't need an episiotomy or any intervention. I had a really lovely home birth and gave birth in the birthing pool. So I would say that made a huge difference for my recovery, and very, again, within the kind of first 6 to 8 weeks, felt no issues down below. Had done my pelvic floor kind of straightforward Kegel exercises, and felt everything was pretty much back to as I thought it should be. And he was 9 pounds 7, so that was my second. And I kind of went back to running a little bit. I'm not a big runner, so it was actually more my knees that were the problem rather than kind of like anywhere else, as far as I was aware. So by the time I went into my third pregnancy, I'd explained in my other video, it was a wee bit sooner than planned. My daughter was born 16 months after my second child, so Beth came along, and by that point probably I hadn't gone beyond the basics, so I hadn't gone beyond Kegels, and although my pelvic floor was functional for what I needed to do, I think between my abdominal wall and my pelvic floor, it just wasn't as strong as it had previously been prior to the 2 babies that I'd had beforehand. So when I was expecting my third, I didn't have any leaking or any issues really down below, but I just felt overall my core was not as strong as it could or should have been, and it was actually more issues with pelvic girdle pain that I had, rather than specifically like leaking or prolapse or anything like that. So I had another home birth with my third, again in the water, and again no tears, no issues, nice and straightforward. And I think again it made a huge difference for my recovery, that it was in the nice warmth of water, and that helped everything stretch. And she was £9.8, so this is all my husband's fault because he's very tall at 6'4". So all my babies have been super big and super long, and I'm pretty average, I'm 5'5". So yes, after Beth, at that point I was like probably within the kind of first week or two, started thinking things don't feel quite as they did down below. And I think maybe by kind of week 4 to 6 I thought I'd rather just get checked to make sure, because things feel a bit different. They felt heavy and looser down below. So I went to see a women's health physiotherapist probably about kind of the 6 to 8 week mark, and she did an internal examination, and I think she maybe said I had a bit of a postnatal bladder descent and more vaginal laxity. So no prolapse, no bulging, but just laxity, and to do my pelvic floor exercises. And I did, and things got better, and I didn't kind of feel that kind of discomfort down below. With my first delivery and the episiotomy, I would say that things felt a wee bit more open down below, and there's a thing called bathwater retention. So basically that was probably the only issue really kind of after my first 3 children, which was within 3 years that I had, and obviously they all got a bit bigger as I, with each one, £9, £9.7, £9.8. But I did my pelvic floor exercises and again felt fine. So I had a longer gap between my 3rd and 4th, and had my 4th child just over 3 years in between my 3rd and 4th. So Ben came along, and during pregnancy again, not so many issues with my pelvic floor. Again, a wee bit of pelvic girdle pain, but I managed it and coped with it much better than in my 3rd pregnancy, so that was good. And when it came to giving birth to Ben, my 2nd and 3rd labours were kind of like 7 to 9 hours, fairly straightforward on the whole. And when it came to giving birth to my 4th, things were just a wee bit more complicated. It was like the Basil Fawlty of home deliveries. Had the wrong birthing pool liner, and then I had a hole in the birthing pool, and I think maybe my body, because I had a huge bump, just kind of thought I don't really fancy doing this. So after a 36-hour labour, he finally arrived. He's been pretty stubborn since that day, and 6 years later he's still pretty stubborn. And when the midwives weighed him, they put him on the scales and then took him off and then put him on again, and they were like, yep, he's £10.12. So after I gave birth to him, I felt knackered because it was such a long labour, and things felt very different down below, having given birth again at home in the birthing pool, but to a very big baby. He looked like he was 3 months old when he was born, basically. And there had been times when I was pregnant, kind of just on the run up to giving birth, that when I went into the shop, the lady was like, is there just one in there? And I was like, yes, there's just one. So he was a fairly big baby, and was running around after 3 other kids by that point, and just not maybe having quite as much time. It did take a lot longer to rehabilitate from him. So I was fortunate as well, when I had Ben, I was able to attend the mummy MOT course when he was 3 months old. So I was at that point already doing my kind of basic pelvic floor exercises, or also known as Kegels. And then I added in some basic Pilates exercises, and then progressed through the mummy MOT progressions with functional exercises, and then functional exercises with added weight or tempo, basically to kind of like move beyond Kegels and to have a functional pelvic floor. So all in all, I would say for the first 8 to 9 months, things did not feel quite right down below. Just again, laxity. I didn't have any leaking or technically any prolapse, but I definitely had what's called postnatal bladder descent. So my bladder sat a wee bit lower, which is common, and a lot of gynecologists actually say it's quite normal, especially with a vaginal delivery, but it just made things just felt a wee bit weird. But that improved with time. But it probably took, from having Ben, to kind of go through the whole kind of rehabilitation for myself, it took 18 months really, give or take, to kind of feel that things were back to an acceptable, kind of like an okay level. I was able to kind of go walk as far as I wanted and go back to my kind of thing, which is clubber size. So that's been my kind of journey in terms of kind of my pelvic floor, having had my 4 children, and everybody's different. So what I would kind of say in terms of pelvic floor, that's where it's, if you can, even a one-off pelvic floor examination, seeing a women's health physiotherapist who actually does an internal assessment and can give you feedback about where you're at, because everybody's different, and time is not necessarily an indicator. I was chatting to somebody this morning that just because you're 3 months or 3 years or 30 years postnatal, it doesn't indicate that that means this. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have got full kind of muscle power, or everybody's so individual in terms of their birthing experiences, and also genetic predisposition, and also for some people have done more rehabilitation, some people have just had so many sleepless nights that they couldn't even think about almost brushing their teeth, let alone doing some exercise. So if you've been on your own journey and you've got concerns about your pelvic floor, then it's definitely worth getting checked out. It's like, even as a women's health physio, I'll sometimes pop and see one of my women's health friend colleagues and get a wee check-up as well. So that's my experience and my journey in terms of my pelvic floor. So I hope you find that interesting. Thank you for watching.